Um, Let me welcome everybody to our continued series of seminars co-organized by the KIU partners and hosted by the Humboldt University. And today we will be talking every night, every Monday we are talking about different aspects about Ukraine, and today is very interesting discussion or topic to target or to focus. When we look international reports about the religious landscape in Ukraine, we do observe absolutely controversial pictures. For example, if we follow international survey conducted by the Pew study, they described Ukraine as part of Slavia Orthodox. Oh, sorry, I moved. Sorry, as a part of big Slavia Orthodox or Orthodox churches group of countries. Then if we follow the Huntington, we will learn that actually Ukraine is not a big Slavia Orthodox space, but is a space of conflict between Orthodoxy and Catholic religion, and exactly the border goes through the Ukraine conflict border. And then if we turn to the American scholar Jose Casanova, we suddenly learn that Ukraine is absolutely unique country in Europe, and the only one of this kind, and very similar to the situation in US. And he says that the uniqueness of Ukraine is first of all because it hosts religious diversity, and this is one of a very few countries which is very tolerant to different religious denominations. So these are three different portraits of the same country. And recently, again, if we listen to the news and read to the news about of Ukraine, we know that definitely beginning from 2014, the Russian annexation of Crimea and Russian assault on Ukrainian territories is changing many spheres of functioning Ukrainian society, including religious landscape. And these changes are happening for already more over 10 years, but they accelerated with the full-scale aggression. And we read just at the end of the year, there was issued a UN Commissioner report on the situation with human rights in Ukraine, and Ukraine was picked up and targeted as the country which actually limits religious freedom. And again, we have a very different story about the same country. So our today's speaker probably will help us clarify how to take all these puzzles about the country. And our today's speaker is Andriy Fert, who holds a PhD in history, and he's currently a lecturer at the Public History and Memory Studies program of Kyiv School of Economics, and he just arrived from Ukraine, having very long travel to Berlin. He is also Ukrainian PI at the international research project Memories of Soviet Repressions in the Post-Soviet Spaces, and since 2017, he has been working in the Institute for International Cooperation of the Deutscher Volkshochschulverband, coordinating projects related to history education in secondary schools in Ukraine. His studies focus on religion in the Soviet period and religious role in memory processes, and as you see, he is also into the depths of discussions of views about what is happening with Orthodox churches in Ukraine. So, floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you for the nice words for introduction. And as you can judge by the attendance tonight, I'm a young historian and I'm probably unknown a little bit, but still I'm grateful for you to come here despite the end of the semester and all this sort of stuff that prevents people from coming. Indeed, there are many interesting things about Ukrainian religious landscape and the violation of religious freedom and all this sort of stuff. And I'm not sure that I will be able to answer all those questions correctly, because the issues that I will going to be to present you today are mostly perspectives from the people of the one particular religious organizations in Ukraine who really think that they are being discriminated by the state authorities. So I can show you only one part of this general picture, so we will focus on that. So my topic is called Not Living the Moscow Church, and I will give you a little bit more context about what it means, the Moscow Church. So predominantly, yes, you recognize somebody. Predominantly, Ukraine is an Orthodox country, which means that it's the most popular religion there is the Orthodox Christianity. And if you don't know anything about the Orthodox Christianity, it's practically like Catholics, but they have like a very different outlook, I mean, judging by these two guys there. So they dress a little bit differently, they have beards, but in all other matters, they're practically the same as to the Catholics. They really value the rituals, the traditions, and their religious observance is highly and extensively based on observing particular traditions and attending church services and all this sort of stuff. And in Ukraine, due to many historical reasons, which I think we can get to in Q&A session if you want, but in Ukraine we have at this moment two big Orthodox churches that compete with one another, that conflict with one another, etc. So the one church called Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or simply UOC, and this is this guy, an above, called Metropolitan Onufri. So Metropolitan is the head of the church, and UOC is, at least until 2022, we can say it for sure, that it was part of the Russian Orthodox Church. So Orthodox Christianity is structured according to nations, and so there are Russian Orthodox Church, a Bulgarian Orthodox Church, a Serbian Orthodox Church, and there was Russian Orthodox Church, and the UOC was, since 17th century, in a way, part of this church. And another church is Orthodox Church of Ukraine, so practically the same name, but shortly OCU. And this church is independent of Russia. It has nothing to do with Russia, and it was established and institutionalized in 2018, 2019. So what we have to know about these two churches is that because of its links to Russia, whether it were in past or still at present, the first church is being represented as a pro-Russia organization in a period of war, with Russia. And in 2022, when the Russian invasion began, this church, UOC, holds the council and proclaimed itself independent of the Russian church. But the problem is that there are some specific legislation that govern religious organizations, which is called canon law. So according to the canon law, this church should have proclaimed one specific thing, which is called autocephaly, and they didn't. So this leads many experts, many activists, and state officials to believe that this church still is linked to Russia. And I have to say it from the very beginning that I have no idea whether it's still linked to Russia, because I'm not an expert in canon law, nor am I a theologian, so we can speculate about it, we can debate about it, but the thing is that I don't know, and no one knows whether it's still part of this Russian church or not. And even it goes as far as to say that in some instances, the parishioners and the clergy, when I ask them from this church whether they are part of the Moscow Patriarchate, they're part of the Russian church, they also are confused. And some of them say yes, and some of them say no, and some say they don't know. So the question is without answer. We don't know if they're still part of the Russian church. But the bottom line that we have to get from this is that it is being represented by practically everyone in Ukraine as being a pro-Russia organization, as being part of the Russian church. So practically all experts are unanimous in saying that, all media represented this way, and it creates, quite understandable and expecting results on how this church perceives itself, how people from the outside perceive this church, and all this sort of stuff. So apart from this, another thing that we should say, in the slide, there's in September last year, the Ukrainian parliament introduced new legislation that allows to disband religious organizations that are linked to the aggressor state, which means that effectively the state can start the process to dissolve the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate or of the not Moscow Patriarchate. And this is one of the political party leading up to the vote in the parliament demanding to vote this law and introduce this legislation. And the thing is that we also should bear in mind that this narrative about the persecution of Christianity and the dissolution of this church, a probable ban on this church that this new legislation introduces, is being exaggerated by the Russian propaganda. And the thing is that it is not so easy to dismantle or disband the whole religious organization. It's the very simple thing that there is no one legal entity according to the legislation called the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Instead of it, we have 10,000 parishes that are, in legal terms, independent from one another. So in case of this new legislation, the state has to prosecute each of these 10,000 parishes and prove that in each case there are links to Russia and they should be disbanded. So as you can imagine, that requires lots of resources, lots of expertise, lots of experts who would actually be doing this, because it's not enough to just study the legal documents. It also requires, if we judge by the provisions of this law, so those things that they want to find out, so it requires a real field work, a real ethnographers going there and doing some field work for at least, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to really prove that some links to Russia exist. So the thing is that even though this legislation technically could violate religious freedom, and it's still written in such a way that is practically unimplementable, because the Ukrainian state doesn't have any resources at the moment to invest them into prosecuting 10,000 religious communities, and I didn't mention the monasteries that they have in seminaries and all this sort of stuff. So it is a legislation that might violate the religious freedom, but still this church is too big, and it's not legal entity, one legal entity, it's 10,000 different entities. And so what is going on because of that? Because of that, and that's what I'm going to be talking today about, there's this discourse that is very popular in the Ukrainian public space among the religious experts, etc., saying that, okay, you proclaimed, addressing the UOC, saying, okay, you proclaimed this independence from Russia, we don't believe you, so please, if you really Ukrainian church as you claim you are, please transfer to another church, to reaffiliate, change your affiliation. So I mentioned it earlier that there are two churches. So the thing is, if you want to prove to the Ukrainian society that you're really not the member of the Russian church, your parish, your priest, and your fellow parishioners, you should reaffiliate. So you belong to UOC, please vote and decide and join another church, OCU. So that has nothing to do with Russia. And the thing with this transfers or reaffiliation is that it's been going since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, because instead of OCU, there was another church that was independent of Russia in Ukraine. It was there, and I won't be going into too much detail about that. What I should say that we have this real spike, skyrocketed numbers in number of parishes that reaffiliated from one church to another after 2019. Because in 2019, this Orthodox Church of Ukraine was established, it was recognized, and the state began to actively promote it, and it sparked the reaffiliation. And after the Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, more than 1,000 parishes, according to the estimates of the state service that monitor this issue, reaffiliated. So parishioners gathered with their priests, they voted, and they decided to leave the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate behind and move to another church. The problem with transfer is also about legal unclarity, because the Orthodox Church, unlike many other religious organizations, doesn't have a clear-cut membership, which means that no one knows who parishioners are. Not even the priests sometimes know who their parishioners are and who has the right to vote. So the law says quite clearly that 75% of people should vote in favor of reaffiliation for the parish to reaffiliate. But the law doesn't stipulate who the parishioners are, by what criteria to decide that this guy or this woman a parishioner or not. So there are numerous violations because of that. So in many of these instances, when more than 1,000 parishes transfer, in the view of people, of clergy and parishioners of the Moscow Patriarchate, the people who voted for reaffiliation were not actually church members. So people from the Moscow Patriarchate tend to say something like, oh no, it was like, imagine yourself a situation, there's a village and there's one church in a village. And there's like 20 or 30 people from this village who go to the church regularly, every Sunday, participate in these rituals, pay what they pay to support the church, do all these things inside the church. So they are active participants, active parishioners who actually go to the church, know the doctrine to some extent, participate in the church daily life. And there are all other villagers who also think of themselves as being Orthodox Christians, but don't participate in the rituals quite regularly because that's their way of life. But they show up, for example, at Christmas or at Easter, so when there's big holidays take place. And following this line of argument that is adopted by the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, these outsiders, so people who profess themselves being Orthodox, but don't go to the church quite regularly, these outsiders are motivated by some patriotic feeling, and they decided to gather somewhere and vote to transfer the parish away, while the real active parishioners, they vote against it. But obviously they are outnumbered because the people who actively go to the church, they're not numerous, and those people from the outside, they vote to transfer the parish. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. So in this particular case, this vote for parish transfer took place in Vorzel, near Kyiv, I guess in late 2020, no, not late 2024, in summer or in autumn 2024. So the active parishioners, so those people who go to the church on a regular basis, they were against the transfer, against the reaffiliation, so they gathered inside of the church building and voted not to reaffiliate. While all those people around the church who go there, for example, for Easter or Christmas, they gathered outside and voted there. So it was represented by the church media as the example that, look, the outsiders seized the temple, seized the parish, and they forced it to reaffiliate, while the real parishioners didn't want to do this. So the thing is that it's impossible, at least at this point, to really find out what is going on there, because there are numerous versions of the story and there are numerous parties involved. So it's impossible to corroborate whether all those claims from the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate saying that these are outsiders who came and voted our parishes to move to another church are true or not. Sometimes, yes, we can observe it's true. Sometimes we don't know. We have no idea what is going on. But the thing is that the whole public space is permitted with narratives like this one. So it's a very popular Ukrainian website which called Ukrainer, and I hope it will remain popular because United States aid stopped, and that was their main donor. But still, the narrative represented there is, well, you can find it practically everywhere if you just Google Moscow Patriarchate in Ukrainian. So the thing that says basically in this narrative that Ukraine undergoes the process of decolonization. Because of the Russian invasion, we should do something with Russian legacy, with Russian cultural legacy, with Russian political legacy, and in that same way, to do something with Russian legacy in the church matters as well. So basically, to do decolonization of the church means to encourage the parishes of the Moscow Patriarchate to reaffiliate from one church to another. So this narrative is very popular, and whether what was going on during the actual vote to reaffiliate is true or not, the thing is that the society encourages people inside of the Moscow Patriarchate to reaffiliate. And they feel it and they talk about it. And yes, there are numerous resources that monitor the transfers, like the one that RISU has, or Harvard, which Professor Sereda mentioned. But basically the problem with this monitoring is mostly that it focuses on analysis of open sources or legal documents. And this is not enough, because if you have one part of the story telling you this was not real parishioners who voted, and another part of the story, another part is saying, no, they were real parishioners, only they don't go to the church quite often, but they're still parishioners, you need to go there, actually, and do in-depth interviews in all those cases to find out if these people really reaffiliated or not, or they simply changed the legal document, and that's it. Because if you just collect the information and monitor the situation where the parishes transfer based on open sources or on publication on media, given these narratives that I presented you before, narratives that encourage people to leave the Moscow Patriarchate behind and change to another church, you can expect what sort of narratives you would encounter in these media. So they're not very reliable sources to talk about such matters. So practically what I'm saying is that no one knows how many parishes have reaffiliated, even though the state's Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience that is responsible for monitoring this stuff says that there's more than 1,000 since the Russian invasion. The thing is, they don't know how to calculate them. So they simply based on analyzing legal document. So some people gathered somewhere, and we don't know how to understand what people they were because we have no criteria who parishioners are and how to identify them. They voted about something, then changed the legal documents, and the state service says, okay, this is the transfer, and calculated and included it in their statistic. I understand why they do it, because simply they don't have other means to monitor the situation, because no church was ever interested in introducing this clear-cut membership. So no church practically has the list of people whom they consider to be parishioners. So they, all the blames they bear themselves, the churches. And so the thing is that no one really knows how many parishes reaffiliated, because it requires an in-depth study, and legal documents are not enough to understand what's happened. Now let's move to another part of the story, to how the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate what sort of things they think about the transfers and reaffiliation. And I should say that the idea about what we should say, what we should think about the reaffiliation to another church, it's been established, very long ago. So this narrative that I'm going to unbundle now, it really existed since the Soviet period. So the thing is, basically there are several instances what the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine says about the reaffiliation. So the first one I've already told you about, this outsiders. So it's not real parishioners who vote, it's some outsiders who never set their foot in church, but they were driven by patriotic feeling who decided to reaffiliate. So that's just one part of the story. Another part of the story, this is a very funny film that lists all those things. And if you know Russian, you can watch it. It's notably, this is most influential Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine creation about the reaffiliation. And it's in Russian, not in Ukrainian. Still, it's publicly available on YouTube, so you can watch it afterwards. It's called Anatomia Raskola, Anatomy of Schism. So it was created in 2002 or 2003, and still all those things they listed there, it was in use before that, and it's still in use. So the one thing is this: outsiders take over our churches. Another thing, all churches that are not Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine are represented as political organizations. So basically what they say, other churches in Ukraine, they only think about politics, they only think about nationalism, they only think about these mundane earthly matters, while we, Moscow Patriarchate, we think about the eternal, we think about God, etc. So all those people around, if they brought the Ukrainian flag, for example, to their church services, they are insane and are not truly Christians, but we are truly Christians. So other churches are about politics, about nationalism, and we are true church. So this is one part. Another thing, and funnily enough, it's been echoed in many interviews that I've conducted. The thing is that those people who have this feeling of being like patriotic and religious at the same time, they're not numerous. So all those churches that belong, all those temples, monasteries, places of worship that belong to other churches other than Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, they always stand empty. No one comes, no one attends them, no one, participates in liturgy, in church sacraments, etc. And it's been promoted by the propaganda inside of the church. And I was really struck when I've heard that people with whom I did this in-depth interviews, they say practically the same thing. So they were basically believing that these churches actually stand empty, that no one wants to go to their church to participate in the church rituals. Once again, there's no way to prove it, no way to really corroborate on these claims. Yes, indeed, there are some churches that are really empty on Sundays, but they're not just churches that belong to this Orthodox Church of Ukraine, that other church, that independent church that has nothing to do with Russia. But there also are churches that belong to the Church of Moscow Patriarchate that are stood empty on the Sundays just the same. So it depends on location. It depends on so many variables that it's not possible to list them all. But still, the thing is that inside of this church, inside the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, this narratives that they promote is basically saying that no one wants to go to that church and that churches stand empty. No one participates in it, and it is being picked up by many parishioners and priests with whom I spoke. And before moving to my interview analysis with the priests and parishioners, so this is a Fordham University resource that is dedicated to studying Orthodox Christianity, and it encourages people from inside of the different churches to publish their takes about what it means, what it's like to be, the religious person and the public and Orthodox person. And one of them was the priest from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate from Sumy region, so it's near the border with Russia. So he published this entry in 2022, in 2022, where he explained why priests of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, why they are reluctant to transfer to this another church. And so 4 main reasons. The first one is because priests think that it's not an real unification. So it's more bearable to them to think of the possible transfer as some sort of a unification. So the parties are equal. So one priest joined with the other churches. But it's been represented instead as transfer, as reaffiliation. And in view of this particular priest, it means that it's about one party that is superior and one party that is inferior. So the priest of Moscow Patriarchate feels inferior when they have to reaffiliate to something, not to unify with something, but reaffiliate. Another one is that OCU has promoted some sort of aggressive rhetoric towards the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. And they have, there's people who are as Moscow Patriarchate represent them as radicals who helped them to seize the temples, to seize the parishes, all this sort of stuff. And also that priests of Moscow Patriarchate are represented as some sort of people who have pro-Russia sentiments, etc. So there's, as he put it, collective responsibility, that all priests, regardless of what they've done in their life, they're judged, but they belong to Moscow Patriarchate, are judged as having this pro-Russian sentiments, as being collectively responsible for what Russia is doing. So as you see from this entry, there's no religious arguments about why they don't transfer. They're simply psychological things. So they're not satisfied with how these transfers are represented, they're not happy with how OCU treat them, and they are not happy with how society treat them in this collective, imposing this collective responsibility on them. So there's no religious argument, there's no theological arguments behind that, saying that this other church is not real church and we don't want to transfer there, so we stay here. No, it's simply psychology there. And surprisingly, that's closer to the truth, because speaking with those priests and parishioners in my study, I've also encountered that the reasons that they list why they don't want to leave the Church of Moscow Patriarchate and join another one is because of the psychology obstacles that they have, not some religious convictions that this church is not real, is not authentic, and has no religious authority whatsoever. So those things that I'm going to tell you a little bit more in outstanding slides based on my research that I've made for the Center für Europa-Internationale Studien here in Berlin. And it's publicly available, so if you want, you can scan it there or just visit the website. It's available, so the full report about my study is available there. And the thing is, I wanted to understand how the rank and file members of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate understands why, how they think, why society doesn't like them, and what they want to do to alleviate the pressure, and particularly whether they want to reaffiliate to alleviate the pressure from the society. And in the framework of the study that I conducted last year for 9 months, I guess, yes, 9 months, I've collected 27 semi-structured interviews with 9 parishes and 12 unrecorded conversations. And I need a little bit to develop on that, because many of those people from the Ukrainian Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, they were very reluctant when it comes to talking to the outsiders. I'm not religious. I'm not part of any religious group and not member of the church. I'm some outsider who come to talk to them about some sensitive issues. So they are not very happy and not very open-minded to that, and not very, happy to share this sensitive story. So 12 of these people with whom I spoke, they said, don't record us, don't take notes, let's just talk about it. And so it's 12 unrecorded conversations. So I had the conversation, I got back home, and I write it down, all that I remember. So it exists as a field notes in a way. And I collected these interviews using the snowball sampling approach. So as you can imagine, there are 10,000 parishes. It's impossible for one person to go and do a representative study to collect a representative sample of interviews, of in-depth interviews with people from such a number of them. So I lived this idea about the representativeness apart, because it's impossible to achieve it. So I try to collect interviews from parishes that firstly are in the regions that are in the borderlands with Russia or with the front line. So I have 2 parishes like that out of 9. I've collected the interviews from the parishes that are in the regions of Ukraine that are dominated by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, where this church is the biggest religious organization. And I've also collected several interviews from the regions where this Church of the Moscow Patriarchate is in the minority. So there are other religious organizations that are more numerous, and obviously this church is in the minority. Surprisingly, I haven't found any real differences between them. They practically say the same thing. So the only one thing that are really different is that in regions where the Moscow Patriarchate is outnumbered by other religious organizations, and in the regions that are in the regions where Ukrainian Church of Moscow Patriarchate dominates, people of this church are more open-minded about the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So this rival religious organizations. So only people from this frontline parishes were very critical, very, very critical. Others were not so much critical. And so I asked them generally about what they think about the society doesn't like them, about the disapproval of their church by the society, and what they're willing to change, what they can change in this situation. And I also asked them about the reaffiliation. And I separated the answer in 3, I guess, 3 main categories. The first category is about the legal problems. So as you said earlier, there's no clear-cut membership, there's no clear legislation that says who parishioners are and how to vote to transfer the parish and all this sort of stuff. At the same time, there are also another problems that exist. So, for example, in many instances, the religious organizations that belong to the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, they don't have the religious buildings, so these places of worship, but they actually gather in their ownership. So they rent it from someone, from the state or from local authorities or from someone else. But the thing is that mostly the people who are, well, priests and members of the church council, they are not very good at taking care of all these legal procedures. So they don't actually have the expertise, they don't have lawyers to turn to if we talk about some rural areas. So they don't take care of documents. And then when something happens and the local activists came to their church and say, you, the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, reaffiliate or be banned, and they say, no, we won't reaffiliate, and then the local government investigates into this matter and finds that the place of worship belongs to someone else, and they simply took this place of worship from the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, because the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate simply didn't have it in its ownership. It's rented it, but it didn't have any documents that to prove, simply because the priests didn't oversee this legal procedures and didn't take care of them. So one priest notably said to me that priests are very, very, very incompetent in this legal matter, so they don't take care of documents, and then they cry about persecutions. So in his calculation, he is a senior priest, so senior means that he has some high position in the diocese, so he is close to the bishop and he oversees other parishes in his diocese, and he knows his internal knowledge, how it works, and he says that the priest and the parishes don't usually take care of these documents, and that is why many of those parishes that were transferred to another church, in his view, they were transferred simply because the legal documents were not okay, and it was easy for some local activists to, persuade the people who owned the building to give this building to someone else, and then represent it as the transfer of the parish to the other church. So it's easy because there's the religious building, and when the religious building there, other priests serve there some sacraments. People think that yes, reaffiliation happened. So the problem with documents and problem with this legal procedures that people have no idea how to deal with, because simply they don't have the expertise and they have no real legal support. So there's no a phone number from the diocese that they could call when they encounter some legal problems and get some legal guidance from there, because the parish the diocese does not provide them with this. And also there's some other extreme in this, and there's also quotation from another priest, and this priest basically says that there's a reason why people don't take care of these legal documents, why they don't care of these legal procedures. It's simply because, in his view, there is a low trust in institutions that these people has. So people got accustomed to that idea that if your priest is in good relations with local authorities and he can call them whenever something happens and they will settle the issue in their own way without, all this legal problems and stuff, etc. So they didn't have this trust in institutions, and that is why they think, why should we bother taking care of these legal documents if we can call the local governor or the local mayor or somebody else and he will do something for us or she will do something for us. Then there's obviously the local authorities changed and there was no one to turn to. But this was one of the reasons why people were not very reluctant in taking care of the legal documents in the view of this priest. This narrative that I told you about earlier, about their churches stand empty, no one goes there, it's there. So it's just two examples, but practically everyone with whom I spoke told me this. So their church is empty. Why should we reaffiliate to that church if it's so unpopular, if some real religious practitioners don't go there? And when I asked them to explain how they possibly know that this church stood empty, one priest notably gave me this example. So it was only one example that I actually got when I asked them to explain a little bit how they know that the churches of other churches stood empty. And he said that the church actually was in such a poor condition, no one maintained them, and he concluded that if no one maintains it and no one pays donations to maintain the church, it means people don't go to the church, and which is why the church is empty. So this idea about this other church is empty, no one goes there, it's very popular, it's very widespread. So the films like Anatomia Raskola, Anatomy of Schism, that I showed you earlier, probably were popular and probably influenced the way people inside of the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate view and perceive their contender, this other church. So they basically believe that the churches stand empty, and that is why they don't want to reaffiliate, because why reaffiliate to such an unpopular church? And also another thing that I mentioned earlier that is quite present in this internal church propaganda, shall we put it this way, is that only the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate is about religion, and everyone else is about politics. Everyone else is about nationalism. Everyone else is about promoting some national values, culture, etc. So basically they say, as to borrow the phrase from one of the priests, so the other church is about Ukrainian and we are about church. Yeah, so they basically separate the two, and they don't like that when these two things commingle with one another. So they don't want to reaffiliate to this political organization that is about this earthly business and not about saving soul and about eternal life. So in a way, we can say that this is some sort of a theology or religious argument, because they undermine the religious validity of another church, its religious authority, saying it's not real church, but instead just a sort of a political party that has been dressed in a priest garments. And this one example, there were a couple of that like this. It's very interesting because these people think that whole business about affiliation and reaffiliation is of minor importance. So they basically go to the church not because this is the church of the Moscow Patriarchate or some other patriarchate. They simply go to the church and they enjoy the community of people that they encounter there. They enjoy the way the choir sing, or they enjoy the way the people read from the Bible there, or they enjoy how they communicate with one another. So they attach to the community and not attached to particular church jurisdiction. And so, as in this quotation, so they say that it doesn't matter who the leader of the church is. So what matters is the community of people that we encountered every Sunday. Yeah. And so these people are ready to reaffiliate if the whole community reaffiliate, because for them it's of crucial importance that this community of like-minded people preserve. And it doesn't matter under which patriarchate it would take place, it would happen eventually. So it doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is the community of people and some specifics of the place that they're attached to. But they are like outnumbered by many others. So it's like two examples that I encountered, people saying something like this. And also very funny example, actually, it's the one above, who says that he likes the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. He likes this idea of reaffiliation, and he truly believes that his bishops in the Moscow Patriarchate and his superiors in the Moscow Patriarchate, the many priests and parishioners are held in this pro-Russia attitudes, and he's not very happy about that. But when I ask him, if you criticize them so heavily, why don't you reaffiliate to other church? And he say, "Чого я буду бігати? Why would I go to another church?" So basically he said that I grew up in this church, I became a religious practitioner in this particular church, so it doesn't matter if I criticize bishops or someone else, I will remain here, so I will not transfer anywhere. Why should I? Even though he said that he likes other church and he didn't undermine its religious validity, etc. But he didn't want to bihate, run from one church to another, so he's attached to the church. And also, many striking example was when priests and parishioners basically said to me that yes, this other church is real church. Yes, like we. So this priest in the slide, the second one, he said that he basically said this in a sermon to his parishioners, that yes, there is another religious organization, another church in Ukraine, and I personally believe that it's real, it's authentic. If you want to reaffiliate, let's reaffiliate. And he says no one stepped first, and no one spoke in favor of this idea, so they decided to remain the Moscow Patriarchate. So this priest is very critical of his bishops, he is very critical of the policies of the head of the church, whom I showed you in the second slide, this Metropolitan Onufriy. He is very critical about the way the church is engaged with this collaborationism scandals in the Russia-occupied territories, but still he doesn't want to re-affiliate because he thinks that his parishioners are against this, and he understands that his church is probably wrong in this political sense, but still he doesn't want to leave it because no one would follow him. So he doesn't undermine the religious validity of this other church, but still doesn't want to re-affiliate. And a little bit more example about the psychological reasons that I mentioned earlier. So one priest quoted to me that one of his friends decided to re-affiliate, one of his friends, priest obviously, decided to re-affiliate. So they gathered the parish, they voted, they did this. And then in this another church, in the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, they were not welcomed, as he said. So the church is structured like this diocese, so the church region, and the diocese is separated into deaneries, blahochinia, so the smaller regions within which parishes are located. So in this particular case, as quoted in this by this priest, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, to which his friend re-affiliated, no one inside of this diocese wanted to have him with their deanery because they thought he is a Moskovsky peep, Moscow priest. And so the bishop had to create separate deanery for this priest alone because no one else wanted to be with him. So he re-affiliated with his parish, but he was not welcomed, and he eventually returned back to the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate simply because he was not felt at home and was not welcomed, he was not supported by his colleagues in this another church to which he re-affiliated. And many priests and parishioners quote these violations. They said that this other church to which society encouraged them to re-affiliate are very hostile towards them. So it has this negative rhetoric, as I show you in a slide earlier from this priest who wrote for Public Orthodoxy. So it's all there. So basically, the majority of people with whom I spoke, they say they really wanted to re-affiliate. They understand why society doesn't like them, but they simply don't want to go to that other church because the church doesn't treat them well. Simply because they feel that inside of this church there would be strangers, and that is why they don't want to re-affiliate. So they're ready to create some new church for them alone, if chance would, if they would have a chance, but they don't want to re-affiliate to that another church, and they prefer to stay inside of their Moscow church and bear all the consequences of this choice. So psychological reasons are there. Yeah, so they don't undermine the religious validity of other churches. They don't say it's not Christianity there. They agree it's a Christian church, it's a real church, it's authentic, but we don't want to go there simply because they don't like us and they're not welcoming and they're not hospitable and they don't expect us to join them. So in all those things that I hastily and messily presented you, one thing was missing. Where is pro-Russia attitude? Because basically, when we encounter any publication about the reasons why people don't go from one church to another and remain in the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, it is mostly being represented as being motivated by pro-Russia sentiments, as these people just want to hold to this Russian world and they don't want to, to leave it. So I haven't encountered in my interviews this idea that, we should protect the unity of Russkaya Tserkev, or Russian Church. There was not there. But still, many of my interviewees told me about this cluster, this group of people that they have in their church, which they labeled as pro-Russia people, or people with pro-Russia views. And every time when somebody mentions someone like that, saying, we have a pro-Russia people in our parish, and I said, I want to talk to them, please show me who they are. And they showed me, and I approached those people, obviously without saying them that other people say that they have this pro-Russia sentiments, and asked them to talk to me about the church problems. They always refused to talk to me. So, yes, I haven't encountered any pro-Russia attitude motivated decisions not to transfer from the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate to some other church. But it is simply, I imagine, because the people with pro-Russia sentiments decided not to talk with them. So I have no idea what their attitudes are. Probably they don't want to re-affiliate because they have this pro-Russia attitudes, but I don't know because no one with this attitude spoke to me. Also, another striking thing that I've encountered is that, so the difference between the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate and this other church to which people encourage people to reaffiliate is the language. So this other church held this communal prayer in Ukrainian language, and the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate held this in Church Slavonic, so in Old Slavonic language, very archaic, and with Russian pronunciation, all the same. So there were many instances when priests or parishioners told me that they really liked the service in Ukrainian language. And they really like how this other church does it, and how they translated it and how they hold it. They like it very much. But still they say, we don't want to we don't want to join them. We will try to introduce Ukrainian language in our parish, step by step, gradually. Eventually we will introduce it, we will change the language altogether, but we don't want to go to that another church. Even though we like how it sounds, even though we like how it looks like, but we don't want to go there. And so the love of Ukrainian language does not mean that they want to transfer from the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate to other church. And another thing I think is very important, as you saw from my example, there were practically no religious arguments. So practically everyone agreed that other church is truly Christian church. And the only reason that they held this church, the people in the Moscow Patriarchate from joining that other church were mostly about psychology, mostly about feeling not being welcomed there or something, but not about the religion. Okay, it was not about their religious conviction. And also, many of this, so like I said, I've tried to understand the perspective of rank and file members of the church, so this ordinary priests and parishioners who attend their churches, and all of them, by and large, were very critical of their bishops. So they were not happy how bishops handled the church issues. They were not happy how bishops communicated with society. They were not happy with how their bishops, what kind of relations they had with Russia and still have with Russia. But still, this criticism of leaders did not translate into actual transfers. So they were very critical. They were openly critical, even with me, an outsider, but still they didn't want to reaffiliate, even though our bishops are, this in this stupid quotation, like they are bad guys, but they are our bad guys. Yeah. So we will stay with them. Okay, they are wrong, but still they're bishops, so we will abide by them. So this is the things that I wanted to tell you about the reaffiliation. Probably I should stop at this point, and we can get a little bit to more details in the Q&A session. Thank you for listening.